Ich habe vor der nächsten Debatte 3 Bekanntgaben einzuschieben. Zu den Berichtigungen der Ausschüsse ENVI und INTA, die dem Plenum am Montag, den 16. Dezember, bekannt gegeben wurden, ist kein Antrag auf Abstimmung gestellt worden. Gemäß Artikel 241 Absatz 4 der Geschäftsordnung gelten diese Berichtigungen somit als angenommen. Im Hinblick auf die vom Econ-Ausschuss vorgelegte Empfehlung für einen Beschluss, keine Einwände gegen einen Durchführungsrechtsakt zu erheben, die bei der Eröffnung der gestrigen Sitzung bekannt gegeben wurde, wurden innerhalb der Frist von 24 Stunden keine Einwände erhoben. Gemäß Artikel 111 Absatz 6 gilt die Empfehlung somit als angenommen. Sie wird mit den angenommenen Texten veröffentlicht. Und schließlich bei der Sitzung am Montag, den 16. Dezember, wurde der Antrag des EMPL-Ausschusses auf Anhörung des Europäischen Wirtschafts- und Sozialausschusses zum Thema angemessene Mindestlöhne in ganz Europa bekannt gegeben. Hierzu wurde kein Antrag auf Abstimmung im Parlament gestellt. Gemäß Artikel 145 Absatz 2 gilt der Antrag auf Anhörung daher als angenommen. Nach der Tagesordnung folgen die Erklärungen des Rates und der Kommission betreffend die Ergebnisse der COP25. Ich möchte Sie auch bei dieser Debatte daran erinnern, dass Sie sowohl in üblicher Weise wie auch mit Hilfe des elektronischen Systems um die Möglichkeit zur spontanen Wortmeldung und sowie zur Verwendung der blauen Karte ersuchen können. Gebrauchsanleitungen liegen auch immer noch am Eingang zum Plenarsaal aus. Im Namen der Kommission zunächst spricht im Namen des Rates Frau Ministerin Tuppurainen.
Sehr geehrter Herr Vorsitzender, honourable members of the Parliament, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the outcome of the COP25, which just finished in Madrid. You are certainly aware that the conference ended 42 hours after the schedule, a delay which is testimony to the difficulties encountered during the negotiation. With your permission, I will come back to these difficulties in a moment. I would like to point out some important progress that was made in the EU climate policy last week. Firstly, on last Wednesday, the Commission presented the European Green Deal, a roadmap to embed climate action into all policies. Secondly, one of the main priorities of the Finnish presidency was reached in the European Council that, after a long debate, endorsed the objective of achieving a climate-neutral EU by 2050 in line with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. However, one member state at this stage was not able to commit to implementing this objective as far as it was concerned, and the European Council will come back to this member state's position in June 2020. The decision by the European Council is a step forward. The EU has now agreed on the common objective of climate neutrality, and all member states but one have committed to implementing it. It is important that the work continues and that next year all member states will commit to its implementation. Now, honourable members, coming back to the Madrid conference, I would like to recall what was at stake at the conference, both for the planet and for the EU. COP25 had 3 major objectives. First and foremost, to finalise the rulebook on the issue of carbon markets, as laid down in Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Second, to complete the review of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage. And finally, to agree on the extension and revision of the Gender Action Plan. On these objectives, the EU negotiation position was clear. The rules on Article 6 should ensure robust accounting for the use of international carbon markets, should avoid double counting, and should also guarantee environmental integrity. Concerning the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, the EU should resist calls to create additional institutional mechanisms, but should support instead solutions that would provide for countries to effectively address loss and damage associated with climate change. As to the Gender Action Plan, the EU was supportive of an extension and revision which strengthens gender considerations and women's participation in climate action. On 2 December, addressing the conference on behalf of the EU, the Presidency made it clear that in front of this climate emergency, the one this Parliament declared last month, we had to change our approach dramatically and embrace the green revolution, our objective being to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent on the planet by 2050. Indeed, during these 2 weeks of negotiations, it became increasingly clear that there was an elephant in the room. Ambition, which was not on the agenda of this COP, turned out to be a major issue. A number of parties, together with NGOs, the youth with Greta Thunberg, and the public at large, in their thousands in the streets of Madrid, called on the COP to do more to address the climate emergency. Here, I salute our team of negotiators who spared no effort and worked literally 24/7 to achieve the best possible results. Their task was made extremely difficult because a small number of parties either refused to engage or insisted on mechanisms under Article 6 that could potentially be the death knell of the Paris Agreement. Until the very last hours of the COP, the EU showed the maximum possible flexibility in the view of striking a deal which would preserve the environmental integrity. Unfortunately, it proved impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, there are several lessons to be drawn from this experience. First, standing by its principles for the common good, the EU is increasingly recognised as the champion and the main actor of the Paris Agreement. By launching the EU Green Deal, we translate our words into action. Second, great progress has been made. Although no agreement was reached on Article 6, the quality of the texts on the table has significantly improved. An agreement on this text at the COP26 in Glasgow next year seems within reach. And third, we read in the news that the results of the COP are disappointing, but we should look at what has been achieved. The review of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage and of the framework for capacity building have been successfully completed. And the Gender Action Plan has been extended, and it was agreed that the work on the Global Climate Action Agenda would continue beyond 2020. So, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, the EU will continue to negotiate the implementation of the Paris Agreement in the same spirit. In 2020, parties will have to update their nationally determined contributions and submit their long-term strategy. I would take this opportunity to call on all parties to update their nationally determined contributions in a manner that reflects their highest possible ambition. I look forward to this debate and I thank you very much for your attention.
Vielen Dank, Frau Ministerin Tuppurainen. Es spricht nun im Namen der Kommission der stellvertretende Kommissionspräsident Timmermans.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Honourable members, the European Union and its member states, as was shown by the member states present, the delegation of the European Parliament and the Commission, stand firm behind the Paris Agreement. We stand firm behind the global transition to a climate-neutral future, and the Commission believes in a Green Deal for Europe to lead the way. The COP in Madrid is now behind us. It did not deliver what we travelled there for on international carbon markets and on other issues. For Europe, there were some bridges that we just could not cross if we want to lead on climate. If we wanted to stay credible towards our international partners, if we wanted to respond to the young people in the streets and to citizens here at home in Europe who are asking for action and a plan for the climate. To put it plainly, we could not support global rules that would undermine the very integrity of global climate action. We could not endorse an outcome that would take us back on climate instead of taking us and the rest of the world forward. But now, we in Europe, we will be looking forward. We will build on the global consensus to work next year to increase climate ambitions worldwide. I noticed, and I think many of us who were there, I noticed that the world is watching us. And they know that our task is more urgent than ever. Last week, we presented in your Parliament the European Green Deal, which is our proposed roadmap to take climate action across all our policies. We committed to climate neutrality by 2050, and we set out a timeline to increase our ambition for our emissions reductions in 2030. That's Europe's momentum to increase ambitions worldwide, and we will work relentlessly next year to do this. And I have to say, there are quite a number of countries in Madrid who were interested by this and who want to talk to us to see whether we can create alliances and help them do the same. By COP26 in Glasgow, we intend to propose to update our nationally determined contributions to tackle climate change. We also need to submit our long-term strategies in line with the Paris objectives. And in the European Union, we are ready for this. We cannot afford to leave anyone behind. At the COP in Madrid, Europe showed solidarity with the countries that are most vulnerable to climate change. We must make sure that we help the most vulnerable in their climate efforts, so that they are taken along in this effort, that they have the capacity to deal with the changes, so that they find courage and hope in a better, sustainable future. You know, nothing makes such an impression as to talking representatives from countries that can quite literally disappear if we don't do anything about climate change. So I think that we can build the capacity to deal with the changes, so that we, together with them, can find the solutions. This is what our citizens want in Europe. They want it also for people outside of Europe. The EU and its member states already provide more than 40% of the global climate finance. Europe will continue to scale it up in line with the Paris Agreement. So we remain firmly committed to boosting global climate finance and to support developing countries. We remain committed to achieving the $100 billion financial goal and financing the key funds under the Convention and Paris Agreement. We look forward to the commencement of deliberations on the post-2025 goal at COP26, to submitting information on our finance beyond 2020 next year, and to taking further action to align global finance with the Paris goals. Honourable members, this Commission and this Parliament know that people are calling for action, and that in fact they are taking action on the streets themselves to push us for more ambition and a concrete climate plan. Most of us who have children are, talked to at home. What are you doing? Are you doing enough? You should be doing more. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing to see this young generation lead us. It's a good thing to see that the 16-year-old climate activist was named Person of the Year by Time magazine. It's good that this generation is taking this huge responsibility. I think our Green Deal responds to the calls. The Green Deal is a start for Europe to reinvent itself, to base our wealth and our well-being on not just on carbon, to get rid of that as an essential element. I believe it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to deliver a greener and cleaner future for our citizens without leaving anyone behind. Next year, on the global stage, we will work with our partners to raise global ambitions. We will fight to make sure that we all face head-on the urgent challenges of climate change. I know we can count on this Parliament to do that. And I know that this Parliament understands that the fact that Europe is only 9% of emissions does not give us an excuse to not do anything. Because I've also seen in Madrid that if we lead, others will follow. If we lead, others will be convinced to do the same way. If we lead, those who are hesitating today will no longer be hesitating tomorrow. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar Timmermans. Es spricht nun Herr Kollege Liese für 2 Minuten.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.